Hello, I'm Reggie York. This is a presentation on the management fundamentals in the human service organization. This is module one of several modules related to the fundamentals of management when you are in an organization, a human services kind of organization. At the completion of this module, you'll be able to, first of all, describe the nature of the nonprofit organization. What is it like? How is it different from other kinds of organizations where you might find human services delivered, and so forth? You will be able to identify your broad preferences for style of organizational management. Do you prefer one that, for example, that is more client-centered than it is executive-centered, and so forth? What is a style that you prefer, and what tend to promote one style over another in the human services? Third, you identify five bases on which the nonprofit agency is held accountable to others. Accountability, of course, is a very important issue in the management of human services or any organization for that matter. Number four, you'll be able to identify the critical questions to be addressed in the determination of the success of the nonprofit organization. Let's talk about three types of organization. By the way, it's at any time you want to pause, you can hit the pause button, look at the screen, reflect on it, and then come back to my discussion. Three types of organization. There are lots of different ways we could characterize organizations in human services. This is just one. This is a very broad kind of categorization. First of all, there is the profit organization. That is an organization that can make a profit, which means excess of income over expenses. That can be distributed to the members, in this case, stockholders, and so forth. That's a profit organization. There's some human services delivered by profit organizations. Public is an organization that is run by some branch of the government. You may be familiar with county public welfare departments, sometimes called departments of social services, and so forth. And of course, there's the state government, there's county government, and there is federal government. The third type, which is the focus of this presentation, is the nonprofit organization. This is a private organization that cannot make a profit to be distributed, as is the case of the profit organization. They are recognized as exempt from income taxes by Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. I'm putting this here because 501c3 is one of those terms in grant writing that you need to know about, and it's included in the presentation on the language of grant writing that you might be able to witness. Okay, let me pose this question. What happens if a nonprofit has more income than it has expenses? Do you call that excess income a profit? Or does it have income that must be distributed to a given expense, a legitimate expense? The latter is what is the case. You don't call it a profit if you are in a nonprofit organization. You take that money and give it to some kind of expense, not to income to be distributed to stockholders, of which you don't have any. So one question is, what must all nonprofits have? One of the things that they must have is would be articles of incorporation, which lays out a number of things about the legal aspects of the organization. It has an organizational structure. Typically, of course, you have an executive at the top of the structure, then you have maybe supervisors, maybe then staff members of various kinds under supervisors, and so forth. It has rules or bylaws that govern certain kinds of aspects of who can do what, when, and so forth. They normally have a board of directors, which has officers, and the above rule the organization legally. So let me ask this question: which has more legal authority? Is it the preferences of the executive or the bylaws of the organization? Which has more legal authority? Well, it would be the bylaws. That is a legal document. So if we are talking about legal authority, we're saying bylaws has more than the executive. How about the board of directors or the staff of the agency? Which has more legal authority, board of directors or staff? The answer should be obvious, and that is the board of directors. They're designated as having power. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the nonprofit organization. Our society has increasingly turned to the nonprofit agency for the delivery of various mental health and social services. It was once the case several decades ago. It was the public sector that delivered a good deal of the mental health services. So if you worked in a mental health center, for example, a number of decades ago, you typically worked for a county mental health agency or something of that nature, and you were a governmental employee. That's no longer the case. Now the nonprofit sector is the biggest thing. But the profit sector is growing, and it's growing faster than either of the other two types of organizations for the delivery of human services. Let's talk about styles of organization and what kind of organization you might have. One type would be characterized as executive centered. The question becomes, what will please the executive? That is what drives everything. The executive has all the power, or almost all the power. Staff centered, it's where it's what the staff want to determine decisions. Sometimes staff are more strongly uh, powered than the executive or clients. But let's talk about client-centered. It's meeting client need as the focus of attention. So look at these three and ask yourself, what kind of organization do I have? If you're thinking about a particular organization that you're working in or might work in or have worked in or know something about. Is it more executive-centered, staff-centered, or client-centered? Obviously, it probably is clear that client-centered is the better way to go in regard to the values of social work, our profession. What does client-centered mean? Does it mean, for example, focusing on client outcome? How do clients benefit? Yes. How about asking clients for feedback? Naturally, that would be another thing that would suggest that an organization is client-centered. By the way, asking clients for feedback and taking that feedback seriously is an important part of that. How about this one? Asking what does this mean for clients when a staff member suggests a change of some kind. Let's change the intake procedures. Let's change the hours of operation. Let's change something else about our policies. If when that is proposed, do you usually have a discussion of what does it mean for clients? Does it benefit clients? If that's the case, that would suggest a client-centered organization. Excuse me. How about showing respect for clients? Yes, of course, that would indicate that it is client-centered. So all of the above are examples of client-centered organization. What forces tend to push the agency to being executive-centered or being staff-centered or being client-centered? What if the agency has a strong union, for example? What would that tend to focus on? I think that would tend to make it more staff-centered. What if the agency is in high competition with other agencies for clients in order to survive? Well, that would tend to that would promote a more client-centered organization. What about this one? What if the executive has a cozy relationship with the board? I would say that would certainly promote an executive-centered organization. What kind of agency that is executive-centered, client-centered, or staff-centered is more likely to have clinic hours on nights or weekends? I would say client-centered because clients. This makes services more accessible to clients. How about asking for client feedback and taking it seriously? We've already talked about that. That's another example of client-centered. What kind of nonprofit manager is better? Would you say it's one who primarily identifies with those higher on the chart? Either if you're supervisor, you identify with the executive. If you are the executive, you identify with the board. Um, or one who is primarily concerned about those lower on the chart. You identify with the needs of staff, for example, if you are the executive. So it's you and the staff against the board, possibly. How about this one? One who recognizes that he or she must be the negotiator between those above and below. Well, I would suggest the last one is the one that is the best, the most optimal. Let's look at accountability, fiduciary, a term you may not have encountered a lot. That means maintaining the public trust through adherence to laws, and fiscal responsibility, in other words, not having scandals about that sort of thing. Number two, activities. How much did we deliver? Another way of being accountable. If we delivered a lot, then people think we're okay. Quality is another one, which means employing good standards of practice. Are you employing qualified staff, for example? Outcome, which is increasingly the focus of accountability, is the achievement of client goals, achievement of client benefit, helping the clients in some way. Efficiency means using resources optimally, something we don't look at a great deal, but increasingly has been the focus. Here's some critical questions. How do I, as executive director, help the board do its job best? We'll talk about that in another presentation, but that's one of the critical questions. How do we develop programs that are effective and financially supported? As a second, how do we promote good leadership? And by that I mean good leadership from different places in the organization. Leadership comes from all kinds of places. And how do we make optimal decisions for the mission of the agency? Okay, let's do a quick summary. First, nonprofit agencies are private organizations, not public or private, that serve a public purpose, cannot make a profit to be distributed to members, and are governed by a board and by bylaws. Human service agencies can be executive-centered, client-centered, or staff-centered. Client-centered is the better one. Continuing our summary, certain circumstances tend to push the agency toward being executive-centered, or being client-centered, or being staff-centered. So that may help you in understanding why things are the way they are. Next point, the critical questions that show the potential for success of the human service organizations of the organization are related to board performance, leadership, accountability, decision-making, and program development. That's the end of the presentation. I hope this helps.